as the truck swerved, a metal canister bounced out of the back. It smashed open, releasing a glowing ooze which covered their bodies. I took pity, gathering them up in a coffee can.
Holy crap, if this is what happened to Master Splinter, I do not want to meet the turtles. Welcome ladies and gentlemen, I'm SocioPsycho and this is Mob Reviews, and today we'll be looking at Guns, Gore, and Cannoli. It is a 2D side-screen scroller action shooter in a mobster, mafia, post-apocalyptic zombie world. How well does it actually pull off what it's attempting to go for? And that's what we'll answer here today. And we'll begin in the options menu. Now I'd also like to hint that this was created by Crazy Monkey Studios, available for PC and Mac. When we jump into the controllers, all your keys are easily rebindable, which is definitely appreciated. I have had to rebind the keys, but I had no issue in doing so. When we jump into the settings, you have a large berth of screen resolutions, as well as the aspect ratios for that. I've found the game to be running at 60 frames per second with no tearing, clipping, or crashing of any sort. Performance-wise, it's run without a hitch. I've not had any problems. It's also nice to see that they have the music, sound sliders, and the SF on different sliders. Now the thing is, the music in the game does a very good job of grouping the world and the aesthetic and the atmosphere all together. The theme of the world is a 1920s, 1930s prohibition of alcohol with a mafia or mob Italian style undertone. The music really helps connect these parts, because if the map is about a soldier or an army we have to fight through an army barricade, they'll have something more patriotic playing that helps get into that atmosphere. But the times when it has a mob scene or a atmosphere, it picks up on that with having a sort of Italian mobster sort of soundtrack. The theme of the game is less about the zombies, and it really makes you feel more about being a gangster or mobster in the old style era, rather than just a lone survivor trying to get out of a zombie apocalypse. You really do feel like a badass hitman striving to complete your mission, which ties into the story, which we'll go into in a little bit. Now there are also different types of options in the modes you have available, whether it be just playing in a game style and the layout, a chapter select, which allows you to replay throughout the entire mission of the different games, and a difficulty to select your preference of skill. I beat the game in about 3 hours on normal, and from what I can notice, the average seems to be in between 3 to 8 hours for one playthrough, but obviously if I can get through it in 3, you're looking at easily 6 to 10 hours if you're playing replayability. So content-wise, there's plenty of availability for the individual. Now another thing that I would like to state is, while it does say it has co-op in the game, I've not really found the ease of access to invite a player into the game that you're playing. So if you're getting this game hoping for a co-op experience, while it may be possible, I'm really not sure how to do that. It doesn't make it easy for you. When you add a player, it doesn't give a friends list, or it doesn't allow you to invite friends via Steam. It's a missed opportunity, I think, because this game would be fun in a co-op manner, but getting to play it on co-op seems to be a ring around the rosy. You really have to work for it, and it's not as simplistic as it should be. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the gunplay within the game, as the game is split up in between the narration of the story, the platforming, and obviously the 2D screen side scrolling of the world that you fight off and kill these zombies with weapons. So how do the weapons handle? And that's what we'll dive into first. When we pump out the first weapon of 10 that we have, it is the basic handgun. It's the handgun that they give you to start off with, and while it may not be all that powerful, it does have endless supply of ammunition, so if you run out of ammunition everywhere else, you do have that availability to fall back on that weapon. But different enemies do have different strengths and weaknesses, and so the handgun is not always going to be optimal. Just because you have ammunition for it, it's not going to be useful against really strong opponents, or even opponents that have just a lot of big groups. And that's where Molotov cocktails come into hand quite easily, or even grenades, because you do have grenades. The second one is a double-barrel shotgun, slightly different from the pump-action shotgun, and again, it all comes down to what enemies you have. As you can see, this fellow with the sign, if I hit him in the chest with it, the sign takes the hit. It has a strong kick to it, but if you're looking for something to deal with larger groups, then you might want to deal with the pump action. It's powerful and it is enjoyable, it has a solid kick to it, but like I said, it just depends on what you're going for, and multiple enemies, it's not really going to be all that useful due to the reload time against it or for it. Now you do have as well as the Tommy gun, which does a fair bit of damage, and it feels like a Tommy gun. It feels like a full automatic, and it's actually quite enjoyable. I feel like it might be missing one slight thing, but then again, it's a Tommy gun, not a minigun, so it does what it needs to and does have some satisfaction in it, as well as the aesthetic of reloading. All of it feels pretty good. When we jump to Revolver, which is a very nice weapon, it usually hits the enemy in the head and it does a large amount of damage. It does take a little bit longer to reload than some of the weapons, but using the weapon is actually quite useful against a lot of the opponents that you face. And then you have the pump action shotgun, which, as I said earlier, is useful against a large burst of enemies, having the availability to pump out the shotgun in order to get rid of these enemies, and it feels and sounds very good actually. Moving along in a little bit of space, you do have a flamethrower as well, which it's a nice weapon to help deal with large bursts of enemies because the ammunition hits an AoE area, so if the enemies are stacked, they'll hit all for the same ammunition cost versus something as a Tommy gun, which is going to hit the individual. The rocket launcher is the same regard, where it's a slower reload but it has a wallop of a hit and it will do a fair bit of damage. And then you have the more advanced military machine gun, which isn't anything overly amazing but does pack some hits, but you're not going to find ammunition for it too much, so it's best to keep it only for those very tough enemies. And you have the laser gun, which is a nice gun which sort of tasers enemies as you move forward. Point in fact that the weapons that you play with all feel rather heavy. They all have weight behind them and they all have valuability within the different characteristics of the enemies that you face. One enemy is not going to be useful to have a flamethrower against where a rocket launcher will be, and vice versa. The only real issue I found with any of the weapons is just a shortcoming perhaps with the game development in not offering more content such as upgrades for reload time or increased damage. I would have liked to see something like that just for extra content to draw the player in so you can achieve something and then play the game even on harder difficulties. But unfortunately there's no availability to upgrade any of your weapons to increase the damage or reload time or even accuracy of these weapons. And sometimes that can be a problem because you do end up in a situation where you become really outgunned against a lot of these enemies, and the sheer amount of the enemies that you face breathing down you don't feel as powerful or ridiculously overpowered that the player would like to feel now and again. It's a balance. Obviously you don't want the player to feel like they are a god throughout the entire game because then it means it's meaningless. But having those few certain moments where just something goes right and a huge area of damage or explosion happens that causes a calamity of destruction would be beautiful to see, and unfortunately there's really not that, and that hurts on the gameplay in the weapons because it is about speed and progression throughout the game, but you're doing roughly the same thing with the different weapons, and as there's no upgrade or variable change within these weapons, the enemies that you face fit within the time frame of the game, which is about 3 to 4 hours for one playthrough, but it means that you're going to be dying, or when you die, there's really no sense of purpose to continue outside of the enjoyment factor, of course. If you enjoy it, you're going to enjoy it. Is it not having a upgrade weapon system a detriment to the game? No, not at all. But it's something that doesn't really add further content or really give the progressional sense of, well, now I can go further up into the next tier and of difficulty with new upgrades. Nothing crosses over. You don't really feel like you're progressing in that regard. Maybe you don't really care about that, and that's fine. But for replayability and longevity, it's not there. Now, when it does come to playability, does the game respect your time? And I would say yes, because it has a multitude of checkpoints as how it saves. throughout the different levels of the game, and it has a multitude of cannoli which replenishes your health. The game doesn't kill you overly much in an unfair manner, and when it does, you don't lose that much progress. It might be frustrating at times to have to deal with content that you make it 90% way through and then you die or something, but I never found the game to be seeking out annoyance upon me. Enemies will come from behind you as you progress forward, but nothing just randomly spawns in and nothing continuously spawns in, so there's not a sense of unsafety or unprogression in the distance that you've moved. And while the world does lack a little bit of flair with the weapons in the larger scheme, it respects your time and the progress that you make. The only issue I ever had in how the weapons handled is the giant rat boss, because when he lands in, he does like a little scream and animation, and during that time, he's invulnerable to damage. So outside of that and the fact that his health bar is a little bit too high, I would like to see it a little lower on the bottom of the screen, because there are platforms in the water that you need to jump to, and his health bar covers that up, which causes more of an issue. But outside of that, the game respects you. Which brings us to the platforming. The game, platforming wise, definitely falls into a tier 1 to tier 2 of skill out of a tier 4. Now that means a noob to beginner, advanced, and expert on the 4 tiers categorization of skill. This falling into the first tier welcomes just about anybody who wants to play it, and it's not something of intensifying platforming capability. You're not going to be doing crazy wall jumping to jump to jump to jump. Everything is rather simplistic. You hop over a car, you hop over a burn pit, you climb up a ladder by jumping on one box to another box. And there's no fall damage. So while sometimes I would have liked to see fall damage, because when you blast off a zombie from a top of a bridge or a building, and then you see him a minute later because he hopped all the way back up, and I will admit that the AI for the enemy, for the computer monsters, is done very well. To be able to shoot or kick a zombie off a roof, and then given that it's the type of zombie that can jump, that it will jump all the way back up to the top of a roof and find you, is beautiful AI work. But with that, at those points where there's no fall damage, kind of just leaves it like, oh, that sucks. Because having that zombie go splat would have been a satisfying experience. Now obviously the trade-off is that means anytime you screw up and fall, which isn't often, but when it does happen, you don't suffer from that same physical logic. The most difficulty I found within the platforming would have to be in the sewers with a lot of acid water, where if you fall into the water, you will get acid burn damage to you. But outside of that, I found the platform to be rather easy, and nothing that was strenuous or disrespectful again to the player. It was very straightforward in where you needed to go and how you needed to traverse your terrain, and the different elements within the world and the different themes of these maps fit in perfectly to what they were asking you to do. Whether it was climbing around in a sewer, or being on the streets, being in a military check station, or wherever that you may end up, the atmosphere and what you needed to do in order to advance all fit in rather well. So I have no problems with the platforming whatsoever, which then leaves us just with the story to talk about. And the story of the game is a simplistic one, and you wouldn't think a game like this would really have much of a story to begin with. But then you'd be surprised, because while the game doesn't run itself off of a story, and you're not really going to get this game for the story itself, because it's rather a simplistic narration via cut screens of progression, you play as a sort of hitman mercenary mobster, which goes in to get the hard jobs that other people can't do. And you have to enter this town which a zombie outbreak has happened, and the story explains why and how everything falls into place. But you really feel like your character by the way he talks, the cutscenes and the aesthetic, and you feel not only is he a really badass character, but everything that he does within the game and within the story narration kind of falls in place to place. So there's never this break of where he's not the character that you're represented while you play. I didn't find myself enthralled by the story, but I didn't dislike it. Obviously, it's not going to be Game of the Year storytelling, but the story that it has does motivate with purpose and reason behind, rather than just leaving the different levels an empty killing field. There's purpose, reason, and motivation to what you're doing, and it ties in rather well. As well as the voice acting in the game is done rather professionally, and I'll let you hear that for yourself now.
Prohibition years. Violent gangs were gaining more and more power by the trade of illegal alcohol. It was a tough time for the average Joe, but not for me. My name is Gore Cannoli, and I make an honest living as an enforcer for the mob. But it ain't all fun and games, of course. One time I got a call from a mob boss called Mr. Belluccio. He needed me to come to Thugtown and find some guy named Frank. Thugtown. There was something wrong with this city. Strange reports had been coming in about bizarre incidents and gruesome murder cases. Violent rioters had overrun entire areas inside the city, and it seemed the officials had lost all control. It's been days now since the last contact, but nevertheless, I had a job to do. So here I was, about to step in a freaking nightmare. He had more brains than I thought.
Thank God, mister. They was gonna whack me.
Don't mention it. Now let's get out of here before they realize what hit them.
Oh, okay. Wait for me.
So at the end of the day, we have guns that all have weight and availability. Of course, there is a slight discrepancy in the ammunition or capability to find ammunition for certain weapons, which can kind of suck because it leaves you with that feeling that you're not really able to have those big kill moments that you want to, as there's really no over-the-top times where huge explosions happen or anything of just proportional magnitude of incredible awesomeness. I guess I don't really know how to say anything else. Think of your Hollywood themed movie that you watch, that is a movie you watch just because there's so much carnage and blood and explosions in it. It doesn't really have any moments of that. It has a steady, fine, streaming line of action and thrill, but it doesn't have any high arcs. It doesn't pop up any time and say, oh, that was just awesome. That was so cool. That move or that ability or that weapon or that combination. There was none of that. And that in part falls down to the weapon system being rather one-sided with just weapons you have in usage of variable against the different variable of enemies. Does that make it bad? No, not at all. But it didn't have that high arc, and the guns do have weight behind them. But platforming falls into the same area. It's not really marketed as a platforming game, and I'm glad for that because the platforming is a tier 1 to tier 2 entry level stage of difficulty, and it's not all that bad. It's not disrespectful to your time, and it doesn't punish you if you do fail or miss a jump. Which only leaves the story again, and I really enjoy the story. Am I going to be thinking about the story and writing in some journal or diary about, oh my god, this story was so amazing? No. But it was good. It set the theme and atmosphere and tone throughout the entirety of the mission, and you really felt like a gangster of this world. You felt like your character. That was exactly the point. So it's an easy recommend. I enjoyed my time in it. Am I going to be playing this game anymore? No. The only reason I might consider playing this game again is just for co-op, but as I said in the beginning, the co-op isn't that easy to get into. It doesn't really have a Steam friend list invite point of access via the options to start a game or a campaign and play through that way. But I had fun. I enjoyed my time. I felt like the character, and overall, it's an easy recommend. I've been SocioPsycho. This was Mob Reviews. I thank you for watching. I hope it's been helpful to you, and I'll see you next time.
So afraid